All right, everybody. So we're going to go through a fat loss for Gen Pop here. The general idea is making it simple, making it intuitive, making it something that they can walk away from. As we go through this, please chime in, ask any questions, and I'd love to go a little bit more detail. So the top of the line is really when we think about weight loss, most people fail not because they don't know what to do, right? And I always use the example of if I put lean chicken breast, salmon, versus fried chicken and donuts, it's not rocket science, right? People know that there's going to be one that has a lot more caloric density to it, have a higher prevalence to overeat it, and just start making the right choices. And when I work with someone on weight loss or fat loss, it's really about just kind of managing these decisions at a high level repeatedly over a longer period of time. But when we think about it from, hopefully what we're going to get out of here today is when we should why we should stop before we should, why we usually stop before we should, right? And there's a Seth Godin dip effect that we get to this point and it's hard and I don't feel the point of it anymore. And that's probably our inflection point. And I think that's kind of true in a lot of areas, career and life, but also any kind of physiological change. What actually is required for fat loss, and then a system that we can just manage operating system that we can manage for a long period of time, right? And the thought from this when you leave it is you got 6 tenets that you can kind of do year round. And what I would encourage people to do is from a situational basis, okay, I'm preparing for a wedding, I'm trying to go on vacation, I just got diagnosed with pre-diabetes. That's the time to really lock in and try to amplify your efforts and think about it in sprints and those things. But this is more of a marathon, every damn day kind of mentality. So really why most people fail is because they rely on motivation as opposed to consistent hard work. And I see this all the time with people coming in through the gym. And it's that first feeling of I want to get broken off, I want to get crushed. And it's this repenting for their sins of overeating and not enough exercise. And it's just not the way it's going to work, right? And as we go through the future of our career and strength training and body composition, we get less latitude as we get older. And what we got away with in our 20s, we can go out and go out and get drunk, have a bunch of food, and we can work it off the next day. Then we get into our 30s, it becomes less and less, 40s, even less, and the 50s, it's non-existent. You can't outwork a bad diet as we get older. And I think that's the kind of the paradigm that we're trying to build here is there's 2 ends of the spectrum. There's intake and outtake or expenditure. And if we start to rely exclusively on expenditure, that strategy will start to come back and bite us in if we don't start to find ways to control what our intake is. And having an external environment that's really, really energetic and enthusiastic is fun and engaging, but it's not a all the time thing. And it's definitely not something you can tap into without any bit of, all right, there's got to be an intake conversation as well. They're usually too aggressive and not sustainable, right? We either do extreme caloric suppression or we do extreme exercise. And again, we're not building ourselves up for longevity here, versus a slow, pragmatic approach of slowly increasing the volume or intensity of things that we're doing from an exercise perspective, or on the other end of it, slowly but surely decreasing calories, slowly but surely start to adjust or amend some of our macronutrients, and not even just our macronutrients overall, but the timing of it, right? And if we start to look through it, really what it's done is we're ignoring the human behavior, right? We typically have this tendency to want to overeat and not move, right? And that is the human default. And you think from an evolutionary standpoint, if we start to look at, okay, well, if I don't have to hunt and gather, I don't want to. And now we have food that's omnipresent and we don't have to do much to get that food or procure that food. So what do we do if we don't have to expend energy to get food anymore? Well, we'll typically overeat and we typically don't exercise enough. And we start to think, okay, well, that process of I have to ignore my internal hardwired evolutionary DNA default to not moving and overeating to this other level of consciously eating less and then strategically exercising more. That is a big fighting of thousands of years of evolution, right? And as we start to look through it, when we think about fat loss, it's really just about managing momentum, right? It's small incremental steps, getting a lot of wins, and then building up over a period of time. But people don't fail at fat loss. Bad plans fail, right? And that's the part as a coach, as a practitioner, it's doing an inventory, doing an interview, working with them, understanding, meeting them where they're at, and giving them small wins incrementally over time that they can build off of. And if we're working with athletes, it's the same damn thing. Just maybe you can be a little bit more hard pressed because you have a little bit bigger physiological latitude to get away with some stuff. And it's kind of what their mentality is. Now, one big thing as you start to look at just this, what is weight loss versus fat loss, they're not necessarily one and the same. And the educational piece of working with a client or an athlete is weight loss and fat loss are two completely different ends of the spectrum. And just losing weight in general, which we now have a lot of information on GLP-1s of just weight loss without any kind of structured strength training or increasing protein intake, is going to lead to loss of bone mineral density, loss of connective tissue, loss of muscle tissue. And that becomes pretty problematic from a risk of injury, immune system, as well as just overall look and aesthetic. Now, the other end of it is just losing fat, which is fat is kind of useless tissue, right? And if we can look at fat has a big metabolic cost, that our insulin sensitivity, our cardiovascular risk, our overall immune function is compromised in some way, it becomes this idea of, I don't want to necessarily lose weight, I want to lose body fat. I do think there's a lot of people on this planet that probably can benefit from losing weight. You know, the morbidly obese, the people that are just have joint pain, ankle pain, sleep apnea, are full-blown diabetic, have metabolic risk, all these other things. There's going to be a benefit to losing weight. But more times than not, that perspective of, is it weight loss or fat loss? We should probably prioritize fat loss over just weight loss and then build off of that, because muscle tissue is just a lot better than having fat tissue. And instead of just arbitrarily just losing weight for losing weight's sake, we should focus on the bigger prize of losing body fat. And you can kind of get into this idea of what's the verbiage. So if I'm framing it for a client, you don't want to be smaller, weaker, softer. You want to be leaner, stronger, healthier, right? And just that framing of it, right? And that verbiage, the communication structure. But the research actually supports this quite a bit, right? We can look at Lee and Giovanni Nietzsche in 2018. Overall findings were not consistent, but suggested that fat mass and lean body mass play an independent role in mortality, right? So if we look at it from lean body mass, more so than just body mass loss, is more important for overall all-cause mortality or quality of life. And I think there's plenty of other sub-authors who talk about that as well. Excess fat mass is increased mortality risk, right? So if we look at it from your BMI, which is your height and weight, which is a big insurance thing to kind of figure out what is your risk profile, but doesn't account for muscle mass versus fat mass. It is fat mass that is actually more of a risk factor for quality of life and all-cause mortality. And that's from said Limmer in 2021. And then general evidence supports that weight loss is increased for mortality risk for subjects over 60 years old. And one of the things that you find with elderly populations and weight loss in general is the preservation of lean muscle mass kind of goes into this quality of life standpoint, right? And from a health span, or looking at it from just being able to do activities of daily living, being functioning, having the ability to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, as opposed to having care or some sort of home that you have to go into. That is the preservation of lean muscle mass and bone mineral density as we start to lose weight is absolutely game-changing for a lot of people in the elderly state past 60 years old. All right, so from the context here, if we look at it from energy balance, which is the caloric intake and the expenditure we do, that we need to be in some sort of deficit. I know this is potentially something that feels confusing and challenging for a lot of clients. And I hear you. I look at it too all the time. And it's so easy as a strength conditioning coach to get imposter syndrome when you're hearing this either metabolic set point, or where you're hearing that people are generally in an energy deficient state, when you're hearing that people are really struggling to lose weight, even if they feel they're restricting themselves a lot. But the bottom line is, if you want to lose weight, specifically body fat, an important thing about being in a deficit is that we have to start utilizing fuel source within our body, primarily body fat, as the fuel source. We have to be in a deficit. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's just transferred from one to the other. So if we have less energy intake, we have to transfer energy within our body, adipose tissue, and turn that into fatty acids and then hopefully ATP. And if we have that mindset that we need to be in a deficit and having conversations, and I'll say this time and time again, Weight loss is psychological, and you have to know the person that you're talking to. So if I'm talking to a former athlete, just get used to being sore, tired, and hungry. That's your job right now. It's just accepting that. When I'm talking to a non-athlete that's trying to lose body fat, it's trying to do addition by subtraction. I never want them to feel hungry. And I'm adding more protein, I'm adding more fiber. But the end result is I'm putting them in a deficit by either directly saying, hey, I'm going to cut your calories, and you're going to have to embrace that feeling. That is your training sensation that you get normally. And as we age, as we talked about, we can't do as much expenditure, that I have to embrace the suck through just restriction, versus the non-athlete that might not have that gear or that motivational component that really responds well to training that or that sensation. It's about sneakily putting them in a deficit by adding a bunch of things, think fruits and vegetables with a ton of fiber and a ton of water content and high protein. And they always feel full, and they don't feel any incentive to eat more. The calories are not the whole story, right? Macronutrients and the timing matter quite a bit. And there's plenty of evidence to support that as well, right? That if I eat carbohydrates specific times of the day, either early in the morning or late at night, that it might actually lead to a higher prevalence of storing body fat, right? And we have abundance of energy and not necessarily need to burn that energy. We could also look at it from the exposure to a certain light and various other things. Without getting too much in the weeds, nutrient timing matters. And the best time to time carbohydrates is typically post-workout. That's when we're most insulin sensitive. That's when our glucose transport systems are most active. And that's about time we can actually use those carbohydrates as fuel. The quality of the calorie matters most. And I know this kind of gets into a little bit of the weeds, but I do look at it when we're really trying to adjust calories and macronutrients, that it's not just quantity, it's quality, right? And if I'm eating, let's say, the appropriate amount of calories to lose weight and be in a deficit, and I'm meeting the right structure of those macronutrients, and I'm still not losing body fat, then it's a quality problem, right? And the mycotoxins within foods, the plastics, the polyphenols, the nutrient quality of those foods, the amino acid profile, the fatty acid profile, the structure of those carbohydrates, if it's not leading into a weight loss and you're constantly striving to eat less and time your carbohydrates and time your macronutrients, it's a quality problem. And I've seen this way too many times to scratch your head. If you're hitting the right macros, and I'm not gaslighting my folks, I'm not trying to sit there and say, I don't believe you that you're eating this, right? I do think it's a quality problem. And you're probably better off getting out in front of it and saying it's okay, organic, pasture raised, well caught, free range matters. And I know it's a big step in direction. I might be a little bit pragmatic by approaching these things a little differently, but as a whole, you're eventually going to hit a blockage when you get to that point where the calorie in, calorie out isn't working. That to me becomes a quality problem, no longer a quantity problem. And I'm just trying to get ahead on that. So when we start to reach these inevitable blockages, that we start to address it in a way that we can manage and hopefully control. And then calories are the scoreboard, but not the game plan, right? If we look at it from, okay, we're losing weight week over week, and I start to triangulate, okay, well, we're eating in a deficit. It's great. It's working. If I'm not losing weight over week over week, and we find ourselves not necessarily at a deficit, maybe not from the caloric intake, but from the expenditure aspect, we start to adjust the expenditure, or we start to adjust the caloric intake to even less. And we start to build off of that. Now, I know it can kind of get confusing, but we can look at BMR, NEAT, or non-energy exercise expenditure, or the thermic effect of feeding. And we look at those three as kind of the total caloric intake that we need to kind of reach some sort of baseline. So if I weigh 200 pounds, I need X amount of calories to maintain that body mass, especially if I'm exercising this amount or this intensity or this volume. The easiest way to look at it from putting yourself in a deficit is just multiplying if you're a man, your body weight or 1 calorie per times 24. And that kind of puts you in a relative state. So if I weigh 200 pounds, it's roughly going to put me at 2,400 calories. If I'm a female, just 0.9. The other way you can look at it, if you do per pounds, just do 12, right? So keep it simple, stupid. Multiply your body weight by 12 to 14 if you want to do it by pounds, or 22 to 24 if you want to do it by a kilogram. But as we start to think about the structure of that, that's where we start. And where a coach comes in, and just a plug here, this is why having a coach troubleshoot this stuff matters, is having that awareness of the expenditures where we need it to be, the quality and the compliance is where we need it to be. I might need to adjust calories even more. And the start point is this. It's that 24 times your body weight or in kilograms as a start point if you're adult male. And if we find it's not working, it's the maybe adjusting the calories, or maybe adjusting the macronutrients, or maybe it's adjusting the timing of those macronutrients, or it's sometimes just adjusting the energy expenditure. And maybe I need to be more focused on stuff. And the body it's going to give you a fight here. It's going to want to stay in its current state. It's where it likes to be. This is where it feels like safest, and it feels like it's most controlled. It feels like this is predictable. When you start to influence your physiology, it's not going to want to comply, and you have to figure out ways to troubleshoot that. But why calories alone fail, right? And we can look at there are a couple hormones that I think really matter here. And there's going to be, I think, a lot talked about in terms of glucagon in general with weight loss. I think that's going to be critical, right? So a lot of people are utilizing GLP-1s, whether it's a semaglutide, whether it's a tirzepatide, or now even a retatrutide. But if we look at it from the context of the other hormones there, and it's kind of going to tie full circle looking at sleep, but ghrelin is going to be associated with hunger, and leptin associated with satiety. And the way I was describing it at the workshop we were hosting, because it's kind of, we got caught up here. You're thinking about leptin is your fuel gauge on your car, right? How much fuel do I have in my body? Versus ghrelin is just how your car is responding to the fuel. So if you're driving on the highway versus driving into city traffic and you're burning a lot of gas, you're just riding the brake and you're just doing that. Your body's going to be ravenous if it has, and it starts to produce ghrelin, and there's a whole another cascade of things that happen for specifically growth hormone, which is going to be very lipolytic at night. Leptin is the same thing, right? We look at leptin as kind of this trigger hormone to overall making you feel fuller longer and not having this binge eating or crash diets or something that you just feel you're out of control with. Impulse control with these two are going to be critical. But then we start to look at it from the other end of it, cortisol and insulin. Cortisol should be high in the morning, and it should start to produce glucose. Normal evolutionary sense, we wake up, we don't have food, we start to utilize internal storage. Cortisol should be high as producing glucose in our body. That gives us enough available energy to hunt and procure food so we can survive another day. Versus insulin is what stores it. And we start to look at that relationship between cortisol and insulin and the dynamic of this rhythmic in nature. So cortisol is high in the morning, low at night, and that triggers a whole nother cascade of melatonin, then leptin, then growth hormone, then testosterone. And we look at then we look at insulin, which is, okay, now I have food at this time of the day. I rush a bunch of glucose in my system, and my body starts to absorb it through insulin. And we start to have this good symbiotic relationship. And the timing of the carbohydrates, timing of your macronutrients as a whole, the caloric density of food, the caloric timing of food, all this matters. And one thing I was talking about with a lot of the clients, we had a good breakout here on this, was we should go to bed on somewhat of a fasted state, right? If we have a bunch of energy to go to bed, it's probably going to lead to disrupted sleep, right? We spike our blood sugar, we spike our insulin, your body's stomach temperature goes up. Your body likes to sleep in a colder state. So your body typically wants to get down to 98 degrees, and we fall asleep, we sleep deeper. We're not having a bunch of energy going through our system. When we wake up in the morning, in theory, we should be hungry. Cortisol's a little high. We need to find food. If we're not waking up hungry, and you see this a lot with athletes and just anyone, and most people in general, they're never hungry in the morning. And anytime we're coming off a 10 to 12 hour fast, your body should want fuel. And when you start to think about it, if I'm ravenous at night and I need carbohydrates at night and I'm not hungry in the morning, you can automatically associate with there's something off hormonally here. And one of the first things you need to do is address it. And it's about getting control at night. It's about having a good morning routine and thinking about food and thinking about fuel, thinking about the activities. If you're working out in the morning, yes, you probably need some carbohydrates. If you're working out midday, probably don't need as much carbohydrates when you wake up. And you've also just put a lot of impact on your liver and your hepatic function, which just burns through amino acids. Protein is going to be pretty foundational here in the morning. So no matter what, if you are working out in the morning or if you're weight loss or whatever, protein is going to be a staple in the morning. Carbohydrates, it depends. And I'm never going to tell someone who's working out at 6 a.m. they shouldn't have carbohydrates before a workout. And it could be something simple, something quickly digested, banana or a UCAN. But as we start to break down and thinking about, okay, well, carbohydrates in the morning, probably not necessary, but we need to fuel. And if we're not hungry, there's something to go through. So this is why having a conversation with your folks makes a big difference. And then we start to look at, again, this ties back into why calories typically fail. And we start to look about direct activity and indirect activity. That a lot of people work out 1 hour a day and sit for 12. And the 10,000 step rule is I think an interesting phenomenon because it's an arbitrary number and it's really not based off of much of anything and just kind of perpetuates itself longer. I would say always encourage people the old school ACSM: move, walk more. Activities of daily living were one part big, parking further away, not using the escalator or elevator. All this stuff will count up over time. We shouldn't get some sort of anxiety about not getting 10,000 steps. You should have anxiety about not moving. That should be there because your body is made to move. Your body is made to move. All of our hormonal, all of our nervous system, all of our muscular system, they need to move. Motion is lotion. And if we're trying to lose weight, the more we move, the more active we are, the more we're getting some sort of effect of utilizing energy for fuel, the better overall we can do. Now, the final component of why calories alone often fail, and this is where people really struggle with it. Not everyone's got the same set of rules in life, right? There's people that are going to be just naturally insulin sensitive. And you look at it from an ectomorph standpoint, the tall, skinny person, they can just eat candy all day and never gain a pound. And then you have people who are more mesomorphic or endomorphic. So a squatty muscular type versus maybe a more higher prevalence putting on body fat. And compliance and adherence to a diet or a lifestyle, there's some people who can just get away with batting 300 every day. They just can't. They'll become a Hall of Fame player and they'll look great, feel great, never really any problems. Now, I would say exterior versus interior is two different stories. I've seen a lot of very, very lean muscular athletes that have very poor blood panels and have very high insulin, very high insulin levels and fasting blood glucose levels, and their lipid panels suck and they're very inflamed. But it doesn't necessarily impact their adipose tissue, which gives them this false indication that they're in a good spot. Versus the rest of us norms, we have to bat 1,000 every day. It just is what it is. And thinking about it, instead of having this perception of it's unfair, we should have this perception that it doesn't really matter if we have a goal. We have to look at it from, my goal is this. These are the rules I need to apply, and I need to do that. And I will say this: the more muscle tissue you have, the less need to bat 1,000. That you can actually improve the effect of the things that you're doing over time. And you don't have to bat 1,000 every time. If you're really obese and you have a lot of body fat, you have less latitude to screw up. But cheat meals or these different things that play out over time, they'll start to become less and less. And you can have more enjoyable meals and you can start to get more from, and you can see people who do get to leaner body compositions, they do benefit from natural refeeds and they benefit a lot better, right? And you look at it from different strategies, whether it's a metabolic diet, which is more of a restricted of carbohydrates throughout the week, and then utilizing carbohydrates on the weekend. You look at it from an anabolic diet, which is largely similar. The only difference would be some sort of supplements and pharmaceuticals. And then we look at it from a carb backloading strategy that anytime we restrict carbohydrates or we get more ketogenic for a certain period of time, including refeed periods, makes a huge difference from overall glycogen resynthesis and lipolysis. But as we get further along, it's that compliance and discipline momentum, as we talked about before, gives us more latitude later. But we have to get to a functioning level and we have to bat 1,000 for a period of time, and it is what it is. But that's why calories typically fail, because you're not accounting for the hormones that are associated with hunger and satiety. We're not accounting for the stress factors. We're not accounting for the indirect and direct movement. And we're not accounting for the levels of adherence certain people need to do. As we start to move into macronutrients, I would say that approach we talked about, embrace the suck. You're going to be sore, tired, and hungry, deal with it. Versus the other end of it, for most people, it's going to be addition with subtraction. And if we look at it from, all I'm trying to do is add a bunch of stuff so you make less bad decisions. I'll start with protein. Protein's the easiest, and it's the most important in terms of building muscle tissue. It's the most important for feeling full. It's most important for increasing the thermic effect of eating. It's maybe a chair off the Titanic in terms of caloric expenditure, but it's something. So if I'm having more protein and less carbohydrates because I want to lose body fat, I will have more metabolic efficiency because of it. And I'll preserve muscle mass. I'll actually build muscle mass. And by default, I will actually decrease fat mass. Preserved muscle controls hunger, improves body composition. But I tell everyone, protein is your protection. That is your safety net. That's a thing that you need to include no matter what. I don't care if you're weight gain or weight loss. It doesn't matter. Protein is the foundational macronutrient for all of it. How much protein? 1 gram per pound or 2 grams per kilogram. Eat protein every meal. Start protein early. Most people fail at getting the protein goal because they backload it. They wait till dinner. So if we're looking at We're looking at protein, get it all the time. And I always tell everyone that when you go, we're in the protein renaissance, which is great. It's in everything, right? I got Starbucks and I got protein in there. You can go to a gas station, there's protein everywhere. There's protein smacked on every single label, which is great. And I think it's kind of the benefit of having in the GLP-1 movement is people are going to be more conscious about getting more protein in. And I think it's lost the stigmatism. Just because I'm eating more protein doesn't mean I'm becoming a Atkins or ketogenic, right? I think that was often the battle, right? Like I'm not telling you to go ketogenic. I'm just telling you to improve your protein intake. And organically, it's going to lower other calories that we don't need. But if protein low, fat loss is going to be hard. Bottom line, if you're trying to lose fat and you don't have adequate amount of protein, and I know it comes off as a lot, as a gram per pound of body weight, it's not necessarily we're going to get it today, but we're going to get it closer every single week. And I do a lot of tracking with folks now, and I make it a big priority. And I tell everyone, if you eat a shitty meal, I want to see it, and I want you to think twice about it. And if you're not recording it, it tells you what you should or shouldn't do. But I want to see protein in that shitty meal. I don't care. I'm not trying to tell you not to eat it. I'm trying to tell you I want to eat more protein. And it kind of gives this conversation around eat the chicken breast before you have the pasta. And whatever you want in the pasta, sure. I'm not going to fight you on that. Over time, I want you to come to that conclusion. I don't even want the pasta anymore, or I don't want that anymore. Great. Don't eat it. That's okay. That's okay too. Now we'll look at the next level of what type of exercise we should be doing. Now, I go into this a lot with all of my clients, and obviously I'm a bias here. I have a gym that only has weights, and I don't have any cardiovascular equipment. But I would tell you definitively, in terms of fat loss, and research has shown this quite well, is that strength training is usually the missing link of why people don't lose fat. They lose weight doing cardio, but they don't lose body fat. Strength training alone is probably the most important impact you can do. And looking at the muscle as an organ that we want to feed and protect, and we want to break down and build up and give some sort of physiological need. And if we look at it from just most people are fat because they're insulin resistant, that the best way to offset insulin resistance is to increase the size of your muscle. And what happens with that, and this kind of goes into the calories, is not alone the sole indicator, because you're not going to burn a whole lot of calories strength training, relatively speaking. If you wear an Oura, Whoop, Apple Watch, Garmin, you probably see a 300 to 400 calorie expenditure during a 60-minute strength training session, which isn't a lot, comparatively speaking, going to a 60-minute run, which might burn up to 1,000 calories. And the calorie expenditure aspect, I'm looking at a 300 calorie burn versus a 1,000 calorie burn. Intuition would say 1,000 calorie burn is going to have a bigger impact on fat loss. That's not necessarily the case, especially if the muscle organ is deficient and inadequate. And if I build up muscle tissue, I improve my glucose transport systems, which is how we shuttle glucose in a cell. I increase glycogen storage, and I have a place to put these carbohydrates. And if I don't build that muscle tissue, there's only one place to put these carbohydrates or this glucose or this ATP, into the liver, and that turns into adipose. And that's why we see a lot of morbidly obese people with fatty liver disease. This is an epidemic. We're seeing more and more obese people have fatty liver disease who don't drink alcohol. It took decades of abuse of alcohol to get fatty liver disease, and we're seeing with people who are chronically obese and insulin resistant getting fatty liver disease. That is a big issue. And it starts with their lipid profile. It starts with their blood glucose and their insulin levels. It starts with their inflammation. And now we're seeing fatty liver disease occur with type 2 diabetics and morbidly obese people more so than we ever have. And it's a huge stress. And if your liver is compromised, you're not going to metabolize anything. You're just not. And we go through something like the Krebs cycle. And what that does is create lactate, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't call it Krebs cycle, call it citric acid cycle. And we look at how we metabolize this stuff in the mitochondria, that if glucose goes through our system and it has to convert to lactate, it's going to go to the liver. And that hopefully comes back around and converts back into that mitochondria as fuel from acetyl-CoA, and then looking at it through this fatty acid. If we don't have a good liver, we're probably not going to metabolize energy at all the way we want. And I think the simplest fix is just strength training. And I can tell you this, running this gym for 10 years, that people who start to adhere to strength training sleep better. That's usually the first thing they tell me. Their sleep goes up quite a bit. And I do believe it's because they're metabolizing fuel more efficiently. They're getting better expression of the fuel that they're taking in. And we can look at it from the other things. The Cleveland Clinic, Harvard School of Public Health, pretty reputable places, but strength training is proven to be better than cardiovascular exercise alone at decreasing body fat. And these are peer-reviewed research looking at large samples. And the caveat, we'll talk about movement is still important. The strategy with movement is important. But if we're going to pick apples to apples, strength training is superior to cardiovascular exercise. And I think that's usually the area that people most struggle with, right? They can kind of outwork it. And again, we're fighting this notion that we're not in our 20s anymore and we can't do what we did. We're more metabolically efficient. We have more robust with our movement capability and our stress tolerance. Our immune system's better. Our liver is better. It's not beat down from excessive glucose or alcohol or inactivity. And it's toxic load from just living, right? The water quality, the food quality, it all burdens the liver, and the liver is not functioning. The whole entire HPTA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, and thyroid is not going to work. And the thyroid regulates our metabolism, and we start to see a slow metabolism by having excess body fat, and et cetera, et cetera. And we look at it from this other end that, when we think about if I have more muscle, that's metabolically expensive. It is. And when we think, okay, well, I want to utilize something that's going to basically cost more to survive. And I tell everyone this all the time, that if we're building muscle, that means a lot of systems are in a good place. That muscle is the last priority if our immune system's compromised. Muscle is the last priority if our nervous system's compromised. Muscle is the last priority if our vascular or respiratory system's compromised. And if I can get muscle tissue being built, that means systems are operating at enough of a functioning level that it's allowing my muscle to restore and rebuild. It's a good indicator. It's looking at it as a potential for other systems operating at a higher level. If your immune system's compromised, you're not going to build muscle. So by default, we can look at muscle tissue building is a great indicator for you're on the right track to burning body fat. And it's also, as we look through, strength increases, which is going to be an early indication of muscle building, increasing cross-sectional muscle area, that these are all things to give you some sort of, okay, you're on the right track. You're getting stronger. You're building muscle tissue. And over time, the body fat will start to follow. But you got to build that foundation of it. But we look at the Balicka 2020-21 from a comparing to cardiovascular exercise. It reduced body fat roughly 1.4%, which helps maintain lean muscle mass during weight loss. That boosts in metabolism, triggers fat burning mechanisms, particularly combined with dietary changes and providing significant metabolic benefits. And I know this is one of those ones, this is strength coach talk. Of course, you would say strength training is superior. Yeah, but the feeling of just because I feel it's superior doesn't mean it's not true. And yes, I am selling you what I do. And I know that comes off as you should have your radar up, that anyone that has this much of a thing to gain or an agenda to gain by selling you strength training should always have a fail of, okay, well, is that true? And you should do your research. You should compare this to other modalities. But we can look at it from things that just exclusively do cardiovascular exercise. The muscle loss and the fat loss, they're pretty limiting. And why including strength training and doing things that increase your muscle size is going to have a much bigger impact on fat loss than just cardiovascular exercise alone. So how should you do it? 2 to 4 times a week is pretty standard. I think the more you can tolerate strength training, the better. It's usually a good indicator that your nervous system and your immune system is really functioning well. You should push the threshold. I think you should get to hard reps. I don't think you should shy away from hard reps. And there's a difference between that and failure, but you should get to threshold. If you're not getting the threshold, every day is using the same weight that you did every single week before, you're not going to adequately stress the muscle. And there's going to be a line with, okay, if you don't have a good strength conditioning coach available to you, maybe you should seek machine-based stuff and try and to push yourself to threshold. If you do have adequate strength conditioning, which I think compound closed kinetic chain exercises, so feet on the ground, multi-joints, a squat or a hinge, a push and a pull, it's going to have a bigger benefit. It's just more bang for your buck over time. But if you don't have access to a strength coach and you know you had to adhere to strength training, let's say that you're a senior citizen living in a community that has access to a YMCA or a Planet Fitness, and you can get on those machines and push the threshold, it's a very constrained and safe environment, that's going to have a huge impact on your system. And just go up every week. Simple as that. Train 2 to 3 times a week. Get on a couple machines, make sure it's structurally balanced, push the threshold, go up every single week. You're getting early indications that you're getting stronger and building muscle. Great, you're on the right track. Now, in terms of when we look at types of strength training. We look at should I do 8 to 12 reps? Should I do 12 to 15 reps? Should I do 2 to 3 reps? Everything always depends. And we can look at it from a full-on force velocity profile or a length tension profile, all this stuff. Typically, when we're trying to build muscle, then there's a lot of mechanisms we could do from a metabolic stress standpoint. So I'm just building up a lot of acidity, just going through a long duration set. And all of a sudden my body feels it's just so acidic and I can't go anymore. I just feel my respiratory system going versus just doing a set of 3 with really heavy weight. That's going to have 2 different mechanisms and it's going to do through. But when we look at it from a general thing, when we're looking at general populations trying to decrease fat, it's going to be longer, intense work. So a set of maybe upwards to 12 to 15 reps. And maybe that's kind of the sweet spot. I have time and attention more, but that's just me. I don't really get the whole concept of time and attention, just doing 12 to 15 reps and then looking at shorter rest periods. And if you're going to do anything, make sure those last 3 reps of the set, from if you're doing a set of 8, doing a set of 12, doing a set of 15, make sure they're hard. Make sure they're hard reps. Make sure that you're really trying hard and getting to that time of significant tension, really trying to control, squeeze whatever muscle you're trying to do, and then you're going to stress it adequately. But more is not better, better is better, right? And if you're not going up week over week, you're training too often or you're not recovering well enough. It doesn't matter which one's which. It just matters that you're not getting the adequate level of recovery, and you should be able to go up every single week. All right, now we're getting to cardiovascular exercise. Cardiovascular exercise is still going to be important here. So we're building muscle tissue, right? That's requisite. And we look at it from, if I'm building muscle tissue, but my cardiovascular system, my respiratory system is not operating well, and then at a local level, I don't have enough adequate mitochondria. So mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That is what actually metabolizes the fuel. And we look at it, glucose enters the system or fatty acids enters the system. It all gets pumped through our mitochondria. And the mitochondria basically creates our ATP. And if we want to have the fuel to do the things we're doing, we need to be a furnace of fuel, right? Whether it's carbs, fats, or protein, it doesn't matter. We want to burn that energy that we're using. And the more mitochondria we have, and the better operational those mitochondria are, the more effective we are going to be at fat loss. Now, not all cardiovascular exercise is created equal. And we look at it from, I think the first thing you should evaluate with cardiovascular exercise is your biomechanics. That if you have bad feet, ankles, knees, hips, back, you're probably not going to be able to run a half marathon. And if that's your only thing you know how to do, that's gone, what do you do? So if you look at it from, hey, I need to be able to pick modalities, walking, running, jogging, biking, elliptical, rollerblading, swimming, stepper, versa climber, rower, whatever the modality is, that we have to have the biomechanical foundation to be able to do it. And if you have bad feet, probably running's off the table. So a non-load bearing exercise on elliptical or a bike makes a huge difference. Then we look at it from the other level of what are the variables we're working with? What's the work to rest? How intense is that work? And I would break it down this, since we're doing strength training 3 times a week or 2 to 4 times a week, depending on your availability and what you can recover from, your cardiovascular exercise should be long and low intensity. And there's a premise behind that a lot of times when we look at bigger body mass people, they start to develop a very thickened chest heart wall. And that heart wall decreases oxygen-rich blood, which the foundation of fat loss from a respiratory standpoint is losing CO2. That this magical thing that happens when we go through fat loss isn't expressed through our digestive system. It's expressed through CO2. That fatty acid metabolism comes out in terms of carbon dioxide. And the better my respiratory system is, and the better my vascular system is, and the more robust my mitochondria are, the more CO2 I'm going to expel. And if I can get more efficient from my exhaust system, is the way you want to think about it, the better functioning I'm going to do from a lipolysis or fat burning perspective. So long, low intensity is going to be superior than short and high intensity. And there's always a time continuum here that if we have very minimal time, high intensity interval training will have an impact on fat loss. It's been proven and it's shown. And it's always that it depends. But overall, if we're going to adhere to strength training, which could be typically shorter intensity and shorter and higher intensity, we have to offset that with longer and lower intensity from a fat burn perspective. So a good blend, if I want to really start to optimize fat burning, is strength training 2 to 4 days a week, and then doing about 2 to 3 days a week of cardiovascular exercise. Long, slow distance that we can tolerate for a long period of time biomechanically. And that could mean for a run for some people. It can mean just an incline walk for a lot of people. It can mean just elliptical or rower, whatever it is. But doing it long and slow and getting to that point where I'm a lower heart rate, but I'm still above a certain threshold, 120 beats per minute, that I can actually expand that left ventricular space to get a lot of oxygen into that blood. And then that beat goes through a vascular system and that increases vasodilation. And then you'll feel the sensation of that blood rushing through your body. And that blood starts to engorge that muscle that we're primarily functioning. So bikes could be a lot of quad. And then that blood diffuses and that diffuses oxygen and the mitochondria feeds off that oxygen. It takes that oxygen and turns it into acetyl-CoA. And then all of a sudden we start to burn fat. And then we express that, it turns into water and CO2. That CO2 leaves. And that CO2 is basically fatty metabolism happen. And your respiration rate, if you're really breathing really quickly and you're really panting, it's probably too intense to get into that lipolysis zone. And the simplest way to do it is you want your intense stuff intense and you want your non-intense stuff long. And that blend of just keep it simple, stupid. 2 to 4 days of strength training, 2 to 3 days of cardiovascular exercise. Make your strength training intense but brief. Make your cardiovascular exercise long and not intense. It could mean walking. It could mean just getting 10,000 steps. It can mean ADLs or activities of daily living. It can mean just doing elliptical for 30 to 60 minutes. But that's the way you should think about it. And you should also look at it from consistency beats intensity with cardio. That if I do Tabata tomorrow and I can't do it again because either I have anxiety about doing it and the feeling I feel on it, and you see it all the time when you get the assault bikes out or Versa climber out, that people won't show up and they won't do it because it's just insurmountable of a feeling. It's not worth it. Versus you should have a conversation, you should be slightly out of breath, maybe you're working up a good sweat, your heart rate's getting a little elevated, but you should be able to sustain that and tolerate that. That is how fat burning really will occur. And it doesn't compromise your strength training is the other big part. Now, arguably, this should be in terms of all the increases of things that we should do, fat burning specifically, is sleep. When we don't sleep well, we have increased hunger. Our fuel gauge is off, leptin resistance. When we don't sleep well, we have lower willpower. That's insulin regulation. And then when we don't sleep well, we have a worse immune system. That's your liver. If sleep is broken, fat loss is harder. And you can see the research here. A sleep deficit leads to a lot of issues with not only burning fat, but building muscle. And we want to build muscle primarily. And if we can't sleep, we're not going to do it. A lack of sleep increases ghrelin, increases cortisol, and offsets cortisol. We shouldn't say increase cortisol. We just have bad cortisol rhythm. And then we look at it from decreases leptin and that fullness hormone, which all leads to altered appetite and cravings. So going back to that original thing that we talked about before of I'm waking up not hungry, before I go to bed, I'm ravenous. That is a offset circadian, offset hormonal system. Now, on the other end of it, stress and fat loss. If I don't sleep, I'm stressed. And what we look through is we start making bad decisions when we're stressed. Fight or flight or sympathetically driven decisions are bad, unless it's in the weight room and trying to push for a PR or trying to go up in some way. So if we look at it from when my stress is high and cortisol rhythm's off and I'm starting to produce catecholamines and norepinephrine or epinephrine, we start to make more emotional decisions with eating. We start to use food as a coping mechanism. It disrupts my hunger hormone, so ghrelin doesn't kick in. We reduce consistency, right? We start to justify our things that we're doing from an emotional standpoint, and we give ourselves the little bit of the, it's okay. And that comes from this process of goals and dopamine associated with those goals are harder to manage. And you start to over rely on emotion or the feeling of that sensation. And we large time use food as a coping mechanism because people will let you down. Food will always be there. That's typically what people will talk about when they struggle is to comply on a diet. I just thought I needed it. And these are real feelings. And a lot of it comes back to just you're sleep deprived. And sometimes it's I'm going to bed, but I'm morbidly obese and I have sleep apnea and I'm waking up a lot or I'm snoring and I'm not getting enough the brain to repair itself and replenish. I'm not managing my hormones. I'm not really getting to the point where I'm in a good position to make good decisions. And we see it with just motor function. People drive worse when they're sleep deprived. We see it with recovery in the weight room. We see these micro examples, but now look at it from the macro perspective. The decisions that we're making, the bad ones, are probably starting off with just poor sleep. But really, we look at it from the other component of this of like, I don't think this is one that should be, no, I don't know. I agree with that one. You could probably get through the bias, the agenda with strength training, probably go through, okay, maybe protein's not the end all be all. Sure, there's always a counterpoint there. But universally, across every single expert, whether it's a nutritionist, whether it's a strength coach, whether it's a functional medicine doctor, that sleep will be the foundational thing that we should be doing. But we know the downstream effects. And everyone will always talk about it's hard to do. And I get it. And that's why your job as a strength coach is to come in there and say, how do we put you in a better position to go to bed earlier and wake up at the same time, and making sure that we're making that a priority? And that's just troubleshooting aspect. Sometimes it's supplemental, sometimes it's routine, sometimes just talking, being straight with them and prioritizing that over whatever training mechanism. Sometimes it's all right, we're training hard, you're going to want to go to bed. But as we look through all this, of the 5 things we just talked about, from caloric intake, macro intake, strength training, cardiovascular exercise, and sleep, that we start to really look at the big problem is consistency and compliance. And I think about myself as a coach working with people trying to decrease fat, is I am a compliance expert. I'm a quality control person. That I listen to them, I hear them, I talk to them, I start to find solutions for where they're coming up short. That we're all facing a bottleneck. The throughput is fat loss. How we get to that throughput is really a matter of coach to troubleshoot and figure things out. And a lot of times it's psychological, other times just it's logistics. From a meal prep standpoint, from making sure that you have protein options available to you, making sure that you're scheduling your strength training sessions, making sure that you're getting in your cardiovascular sessions, making sure that you're being in a really good sustainable method over time. Stacking days, stacking weeks, stacking months. And if we can get great compliance over a long period of time and it becomes subconscious and automatic, which is this habit forming, we're going to be very, very valuable. And I think this is going to be universal for everything, athletes and just general population clients. But we look at something that following something without listening and learning as a coach is a fool's errand. They're telling you every single day where they're struggling. Turn your ears on and listen. Find solutions to their problems and you'll be indispensable. So here's it breaks down as a whole system. We want to be in a deficit. We want to have a high protein intake. We want to have strength training as our foundation. We want to include daily movement and cardiovascular exercise with intention. We want to have sleep 8 hours a night. And then we want to be consistency, right? We want that. That's what we should be fighting for. And here's the end of it, right? If we look at it from a whole, fat loss isn't hard because you're broken. It's hard because whenever we've shown a system, you've never shown a system that works. And what I would say, this is your 365 plan, that you're doing this every day. Imagine if you could do this every week. You have a great foundation to make bigger wholesale changes. And then when you want to get to that threshold of, okay, I got a wedding, I got a vacation, I really want to I'm coming off a breakup. Your ability to tolerate that uptick in caloric deficit, that macronutrient adjustment, that training adjustment is going to be a lot better than if we just look at it from going from 0 to 100, not going to manage. It's a lot easier to go from 50 to 60 and manage it. And that's what I would tell folks is don't try to just violently react to things, or if you don't the way you look or feel or something dramatic happened, you got told you got pre-diabetic. That didn't happen overnight, so you shouldn't expect it to change overnight. You have to be pragmatic and very, very conscious of this, but we should start to build the infrastructure, getting people to this as being their homeostasis. This is their midpoint. And there'll be periods where they're going to go on vacation and they deserve a break from this and be able to back up a little bit. Right. And we're on vacation and we still finding ways to get some walking in, a little bit of strength training. We're starting ways to get just a little bit less protein, but we're still having protein every meal. Or maybe he's having a couple drinks and we don't want to sleep 8 hours. It's fine. But sleeping 7 hours as opposed to 8 is a lot different than never sleeping at 6. And that process of, I don't want people to feel guilty or I'm on unhealthy relation stuff, but I want to know that their default operating system is right around here. And the deviation from that is going to be a lot better managed, whether it's a downtick or an uptick. And that's what we're trying to build, is just a more median operating manual that people can function, and then it can titrate up or titrate down depending on what their goals are or where they're at personally in life. All right, that is my spiel. Nate, do you have any questions?
I guess in terms of, two questions would be off the bat. One, in terms of modalities for specific cardiovascular training. So again, if one of the things I try to recommend to people is doing more circuit-based things. as opposed to long, steady state cardio or just going for a run. Because I think that's pretty much everybody's default when it comes to, I need to get cardio, I'm just going to go for a long run. But how to guess structure that for a client or somebody who maybe needs that and can't run, or running's not the best idea for them. Because again, if I've run into this where people are overweight and they just want to, well, I need to go on a long run, and it's probably not the best idea for you. So just selling that idea of there's other cardio based things that we can do. And then how are we combating, I guess, the CrossFit model of, hey, we're tapping into strength a little bit with some of that, but a lot of it's more so just it's cardio based. Everything's just as much work as I can get done in a specific amount of time. And so selling the strength training program of I'm doing less work technically, but it's better quality, and getting them to buy into that.
Yeah. So yeah, I do agree. The circuit idea for a lot of folks is actually probably better than just going for a long run. I look at it in a couple of ways. One, how do we manage the intensity? Heart rate monitors are really helpful for this. A lot of people have Apple Watches. A lot of people have Auras and Whoops and Garmin. So tell them they're going to stay within a specific zone of intensity, right? And it could be the strain score and Whoop. It could be the caloric expenditure on Aura. It could be the heart rate on a Polar or an Apple, right? And you're saying, okay, I want you to stay in this window. So that 120 to 160, that's a pretty good window. And if we can keep people in that window for the entirety of that circuit, it's great. And if you're going to do a circuit with a work to rest, right? So say you do a 3-minute bout circuit of some sort, we want to have a rest period that's kind of related to that intensity or that duration. So one thing that you will look at with is, and for you as a coach, of their heart rate recovery. So let's say they do a 5 exercise circuit and their heart rate gets to 160, 165. If it takes them under a minute to recover about 30 to 35 beats per minute, so they get down to 130, they're pretty aerobically fit and in a good spot to handle that stress. If at a minute they're still at 150, they're probably not that aerobically fit. So you probably have to figure out ways to decrease the intensity so they don't get that high. And the more we can kind of stay in that window of 120 to 160 and having that bandwidth, and then it makes a big difference. The other part of it, and you could use an RPE too. How do you feel? Talk. We should be able to have a conversation and not throwing up and keeling over and dying during one of these circuits. The other thing, and you know this as well as anyone working with me, is this idea of pattern overload. And let's say that the foundation of your circuit is squats, hinges, and pushes, right? And joints are joints, man. They can take a certain amount of beating, and what you're doing is flexing and extending the ankle and hip, or the ankle, knee, and hip, and it's just pounding and pounding. And let's say there is some sort of asymmetry or some sort of restriction in the range of motion. That restriction is going to cost you some way, somehow. So looking at hitting different planes and different vectors, some rotational stuff, some horizontal and some other rotational vector stuff, that makes a big difference. And the holistic program and that's where your creative juices really need to flow is, okay, I'm going to do a very up and down type of movement with squats and hinges. I want to include some lateral movement, and I want to include some more locomotive strategies, and trying to get some different things. And, maybe is someone who has a former track and field background that gained a couple pounds. A run for a certain distance with a certain work to rest ratio might not be a bad call. They're good at it. They know what they're doing. We talked about it at the workshop I hosted here. One of my clients has a boxing background. Yeah, just as long as you can manage the intensity and you're not pounding your joints, but hitting the speed bag, getting a couple shadow boxing rounds, hitting the heavy bag, but being more fluid with your motion and not just trying to break the bag off the chains. Those are going to be, you're good at it. You have a skill. Great. Do it. Jump rope, all that stuff. It's great. It's a great workout. It's great cardio, but manage the intensity. And also too, and I know I talked about this with another guy he's got a mixed martial arts. Coaches are coaches. And we work with people that have a certain aptitude. We kind of want to get it out. We want to push them. We want to get going a little bit. And if let's say that you are a brown belt in jiu-jitsu and you go there, that coach is going to want to get a good workout in. And they're feeling inclined to get really there. And okay, we're really going to push you here today. Well, turn this more into a skill-based thing or more of a counter to the stuff I'm doing in the weight room. Have the discussion. Can we just work more drills? Can we be more fluid? Can we be more flow stuff? Can we do continuous stuff and just trying to get out of positions? But doing activities that you enjoy doing that's complementary, that you're going to sustain, is there. But just figure out ways to control the intensity. It's going to be a big anecdotal effect, right? The appearance of that working is really, really important to kind of like do with your clients. There's a biomechanical cost, and we can look at shoulders, we can look at hips, we can look at back, we can look at knees. That if all we're doing is anterior chain stuff that's just easy to manage or easy to program for, there's something to give in the weight room we're gonna have to do on the other end of it. And things like wall balls, things like burpees, things like thrust or clean to press, stuff like that, just high volume compound closed kinetic chain movements. It's about getting to point B. It's not about making sure the point A to point B is quality. And if their movement quality is going down, that's costing you time in the weight room. They can build one of the most important organs from a strength training perspective. Now, there's an element of, okay, you interval work because you have short duration intensity. Would you be comfortable doing a kettlebell with a lighter kettlebell and doing some of this more skill-oriented stuff? Would you be comfortable doing a med ball thing and getting circuits that way? Would you be comfortable doing stuff that's just not going to pound these joints that we're pounding in the weight room and not taking from Peter to pay Paul? And going, okay, well, like if that's good, that's going to become your strength training, really is what you're looking at it from. And you can't argue with the outcome of CrossFit. There's like bodybuilders just doing this window we talked about before of this 40 to 70 seconds of time under tension continuously with stopping start. They do a bodybuilding level work to rest all the time. And that's why they look the way they look. And now it's morphologically, it's changing the aesthetic. They do have that signature CrossFit look. But it's no different than when a bodybuilder is hitting a set of 12 reps, down a press and a pull and really trying to target muscle. Theirs is more of a general build. But that aesthetic from that, okay, well, that's going to become our strength training then. And then from a cardiovascular standpoint, we're going to have to use the rower. We're going to have to use the concept 2 bike and things. And we're going to have to do longer duration stuff. And, we'll just use it in different ways. But it's a tough battle to fight. It's a tough hill to climb. It's a skill versus a desire. And there's always the fighting the ghost of your 20s. And when you hit your 30s and your 40s, you're not what you once were, but you still want to be what you were. And that, it's low-hanging fruit that I could just get throttled by a Metcon, and I know I'm going to feel a certain way, and I know that's short-term validation. The problem is that's sustainable, and we're looking for a long, slow, hard change. It took us a while to get to this body fat. It's going to take us a while to get out of it. As long as we're set up for the long journey, the better. There's no shortcut in physiology, and you have to play the long, hard road. And if your joints are giving out, or you're just physiologically wrecked from a nervous system standpoint or immune system standpoint, you're going to pay the piper somehow. And it's that reaper is coming in quicker and quicker as we get into our 30s and 40s.
For sure. And then I guess in terms of supplemental support, is there a base thing that say just general, okay, let's try this and then see if we need to add, subtract, kind of where we're going with that?
The protein aspect is,
I
think first and foremost, right? We look at it from, it's hard to get a gram per pound of body weight. That's why supplemental forms exist. So protein's always going to be some sort of format. I'll look at allergies. So do they have a whey allergy? Okay, go to a beef or go to a collagen, go to a plant-based. Do they have some sort of aversion to using some sort of animal-based protein? Use a good plant, pea, hemp, rice. That makes a big difference. And then looking at it from the other level of things that just help, right? Magnesium is a foundational mineral for about 300 enzymes. So a good chelated magnesium bisglycinate is going to make a big difference from an enzymatic process. So if you have more magnesium, your body just operates better. I think a high EPA fish oil or full spectrum omega is going to make a big difference from an insulin sensitivity standpoint. That's going to help a ton just from overall better fatty acid profile. Typically, we don't get a lot of good omega-3 fatty acids in our diet anyway, unless you're eating a lot of pasture-raised meats and a lot of wild caught fishes. And then just pasture-raised eggs, that'll make a big difference from getting your omega-3s in there. But generally speaking, good fish oil will help that, and it helps out with insulin resistance. It helps out with overall inflammation in general. And then, there's some other really good stuff. I mean, obviously, I'm an advocate for metabolic elite, and GLUT4 regs it's just a good holistic view of improving overall GLUT4 transport systems, which is going to help your insulin regulation and your blood glucose level. But then again, too, you can look at other things. Okay, sleep compromised. You go, how do I get more restful, relaxing sleep? And there's plenty of good formulations for that. You can relate to magnesium threonate's a big one, and inositol is a good one. I glutamine at night for a lot of people because it helps repair that gut, get some amino acids. Typically, you get more restful. A lot of times you hear folks talking about eating a lot of carbohydrates a night will help this more of this euphoric feel, and that's just serotonin kicking in, because 90% of serotonin is produced in your gut. But if you supplement glutamine, you supplement glycine, a lot of this stuff will help repair that gut and actually improve the sensation that we're trying to get from that. And instead of craving carbohydrates, we're just trying to give our gut a really good operating system to manage it. So that will help out a lot. And then in the morning, caffeine is really good. Obviously we know that. I think that's really timed well, and it can be really beneficial for fat loss. I've done a lot of research with nicotine and serotonin, which is more associated with that, but a strategically used nicotine actually can help with fatty acid metabolism, not abused, but really used well, because it goes through these dopaminergic pathways and specifically helps with receptor site sensitivity in this umbilical area. And there's beta and alpha cells in our adipose tissue, and the higher the prevalence in certain areas of our body means that we're probably going to have a higher affinity for storing fat there. And nicotine actually helps with umbilical fat quite a bit, which is going to be more associated with males and metabolic syndrome, as long as it's used strategically. And I think it's a powerful ergogenic aid. Usually it's abused, which is a problem. So maybe being a little bit calculated when you do it. And I don't know. Everyone kind of goes back and forth on stuff there, but more of the fringe stuff. NAD is, just overall better for cellular metabolism. That makes a big thing. Extract, or what we have in Metabolic Elite, or ginsetinide from Enduro, just overall mitochondrial function and better oxygenated tissues. That'll help a lot. Another one I really like is carnitine, a full carnitine blend. I think that makes a big difference, because carnitine is going to be the amino acids with shuttling the fatty acids. So if you have more circulating fatty acids, carnitine's there, and it's amino acid, so it's innocuous in terms of excess, but it's going to have a benefit if it's available. If you're utilizing more fatty acids for fuel, having carnitine in your system will help quite a bit for managing that. But as a whole, from a supplementation standpoint and everything else, I would probably go top of the line. Magnesium, protein, and fish oil would be, your staples. Yeah. And then, looking at it from Enduro with it's a rhodiola extract. It's called Mankind, the rhodiola extract. That'll help a ton. Again, looking at nicotine and caffeine, and then carnitine will make a big difference as well.
Sweet.
Awesome, man. Anything else?
I guess, would there be a difference between, say, if I'm taking a female client versus a male client, or should we say principles pretty much apply overall? Because I know females, body fat percentage wise, we probably want a little bit higher, but that goes into different physiology of males versus females. Yeah,
there definitely is a difference. Anyone who's worked with them knows it just is what it is. The way I look at it with females is typically what's the lowest hanging fruit, and it's muscle mass. If I can find ways to increase their muscle mass, the better effect from a fat burning perspective there will be. And women are estrogenic by nature, so they have overall better heart health and they have better overall heart function. They typically are more aerobically adapted. So increasing their anaerobic input through strength training is going to make the biggest difference. That would be the biggest influence on that. But there's a definitively different physiology. And then we look at older women who have gone through menopause, that they're essentially changed their internal physiology. And then you start to see potentially a reversal of adipose tissue development from their lower body to their upper body. And I'm not going to sit there and say you treat them a man, but you should probably look at through, women who are storing more body fat in their upper body. You might need to include more cardiovascular and aerobic exercise. It's a heavily muscle-bound man who's just storing a lot of umbilical fat. That cardiovascular exercise and stress management is probably the biggest, lowest hanging fruit. And I would say the same thing for 40-year-old plus women who are storing more body fat in their umbilical section. That strength training and stress management, cardiovascular exercise and stress management will make the biggest difference, as well as sleep. But for general speaking, for women, I think the lowest hanging fruit is going to be adding muscle tissue.
Oh, yeah.
And all the things that go into it, from a training input, from a nutritional input, from a supplemental input. Now, you can get a long way for someone who's got a low lean body mass by just doing strength training 3-4 days a week, creatine, amino acids, and protein. And you'll see dramatic changes fairly quickly. And then you have to have that conversation about, we're not focusing on weight loss, we're focusing on fat loss. because they're not going to see a weight loss if they're strength
Yeah.
training 4 days a week and they increase their protein intake to a gram per pound of body weight. And that's a different thing,
Yeah.
right? And there's just hearing them, listening to them, talking to them, that, you know, the immediate association is you're just going to try to improve my neck size because they'll care about, you know, that generic, whatever typecast you're going to get of it. What is the worst thing about improving muscle mass that you're probably afraid of? And, you know, whatever the association from a feminine perspective or just the, you don't understand the female body. I don't. Tell me what you think is ideal or a preference for you. And let's work together on this. Let's collaborate on it. I know from a physiological perspective what I want to do, but from a psychological perspective, just having an open, honest discourse about it. Because at the end of the day, that I want to accomplish what they want me to accomplish. But I also know there's some things that we absolutely need to do to improve your health and your function. So I think that helps quite a bit. Just talking, but from a pure detaching from any psychological conversation, just it's going to be increasingly muscle mass is first and foremost thing to do.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that for sure.
All right, man. This is awesome, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have this stage recorded and we'll get this out to people.
Perfect. All right, coach.
All right, brother. Have a great rest of your day, man.
I'll see you later.
See you, buddy.